Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Phantom music. Since the beginning, people have claimed to hear voices and music coming from nowhere, from no specific source, or hear the trees talk and the animals murmur between themselves. The consensus among society is that these people are crazy. Nevertheless, there have been cases of sane people being haunted by phantasmagoric sounds and voices. Those anomalies have even inspired whole virtuoso compositions. In his alchemical studies, C.G. Jung narrates the story of an African soldier who heard a tree talking to him, to the point to engaged in a conversation. Modern psychologists would posit the soldier was having a monologue with himself. The voice of his subconscious projected on the tree. Jung ventures another explanation. A demon, a spirit floating along the borders of the spiritual and material planes. Among the people who have heard voices that influence their lives, we find St. Ignatius Loyola, Martin Luther, Sigmund Freud, R.L. Stevenson. Socrates used to talk with a personal demon about the gods. George Fox, founder of the Quakers, received inspiration to reform the Christian religion from voices he heard during his everyday activities. The ubiquitous voice phenomena has a modern spin, since many contactees and ufologists consider these voices coming from beings outside our world, even outside our own universe. One night in 1765, the composer and acclaimed violin virtuoso, Giuseppe Tartini, was sleeping peacefully on his bed. His dream was exceptional. He was playing a piece on his violin when the devil himself appeared and asked Tartini if he could lend him his violin. Tartini accepted, and the devil took the instrument. Then he began to play it on a level I had never before conceived was possible. Once he woke up, he hurried to his studio and started copying the notes he heard on his dream. Thus his most famous violin composition was created, Il Trillo del Diavolo, Devil's Trill, according to musicologists. It is an extraordinary piece, quite demanding, and completely different in style to anything Tartini had composed before. Notorious astronomer and champion of science, Camille Flammarion, devoted extensive pages of his death and its mystery to narrate personal anecdotes of people who heard disembodied voices of dead relatives, warning of imminent danger, or specific messages to other relatives. Even Anna Fort, widow of Charles Fort, had claimed to have heard her deceased husband's warnings. In October of 1867, in the Calvados Castle, France, its inhabitants were suffering from a classic poltergeist attack. Furniture levitated and was flung across the rooms. Objects disappeared and reappeared at random. Otherworldly voices were heard. Doors and windows opened as if they had life of its own. But the most strange occurrence was the mellifluous sound of an organ playing church pieces. Always at midnight. The castle did not even have an organ. St. John Mary Vianney, the famous cure of Ars, was tormented during all the winter of 1824 by phantom sounds coming from his backyard. He could not sleep at night, hearing the sounds of military trumpets, of invisible armies marching, of horses and metal clashing. The 15th of November of 1889. In Clarendon, Quebec, the Dag family received a curious visitor. The youngest of the daughters saw an old man entering one of the sheds near the house. The family went after the intruder, but they found nothing except a voice. An old, gruff voice hailed them with all kind of obscenities. At one point the voice said, "I am the devil. I'll have you in my clutches. I'll break your neck." Later, the entity would apologize and promise the family he would behave. News of this curiosity living with the Dags spread around town, and many people came. The voice engaged in several degrees of politeness with whoever talked to him, showing an impressive and intimate knowledge of each person, to the point of exposing intimate details of their lives that its interlocutors would have rather kept private. On being congratulated for its change of tone, the entity explained, "I am not the person who used the filthy language. I am an angel from heaven sent to chase him away." It also said he would leave them by Sunday. The voice later broke in a cataract of obscenities, but it calmed down by the afternoon. Next Sunday, it joined a choir of townspeople chanting religious hymns. People asked him to stay with them. Suddenly, a light illuminated the shed. A white-clad figure appeared, singing a hymn. He ascended to heaven, or from whatever place the entity came. The music kept playing almost an hour after it left. A letter to Manchester Evening News in 1968, complaining about mysterious sounds heard in an empty office at Peter Street, in a dry, municipal tone. The angry neighbor describes how he is disturbed every night by the sound of panpipes, drums, rattles, and singing. He says the voices sound too high-pitched to be human beings, and blamed hippies for the disturbances. In a follow-up of the story by the newspaper, the police went to the office, but they found not a single trace of that place being recently used by humans.
A ghastly surprise at the park. The Japanese are masters of the grotesque. Their artists have since centuries recreated the most truculent and morbid images, from demons with long necks, ukiyo-e prints of famous murders, etc. It is no surprise their criminals would put the same effort and give their misdeeds an extra flavor. There is even whole subclass for a certain specific type of murder, the one in which the victim is cut to pieces, and said pieces are distributed with or without an order. It is called barabara satsujin, or scattered murder. There have been so many instances of this type of killing that it deserved its own class for its better understanding by the Japanese criminological students and agents of the law. One of these incidents occurred on the 23rd of April of 1994. It was a nice, calm morning. The cleaning staff was working hard in order to leave the park presentable for the first visitors, when one of the members found in a trash can a plastic bag, which emanated a foul odor. The woman thought it would be raw fish. When she opened it, she shrieked in terror. Inside were human parts. After examining the bag and parts, and despite not finding the head, they determined they belonged to a top-class architect named Seiichi Kawamura. There were 24 body parts, all cut with surgical precision. With an electrical saw, each piece was 24 centimeters in length, 7.8 inches for you burgers. They were carefully washed, and the blood was completely drained. It was impossible to establish if Kawamura was alive or already dead when he was dismembered. Some examiners found traces of internal bleeding in the muscles, hinting that he may have been alive when the saw touched his flesh. Of the attackers, nobody noted anything suspicious, although some people claimed they saw a person who resembled Kawamura entering the park with 2 other unidentified partners. But the kind of fine job applied to the architect would have been impossible to do in a place like the park, in such a small window of time, at everybody's sight. Kawamura was last seen by a friend the night of the 22nd of July. Together they went to a karaoke bar. They parted ways at 11 p.m. His family reported him missing the next day. Despite interrogating 37,000 people, the police couldn't get even a single description or strong clue. Some rumors said he was hit by a car, and the driver dismembered his body to avoid arrest. Others, that Kawamura was a member of a strange cult and was killed because he wanted to leave it. The case turned cold, and several months later, the unit working on it was assigned to work on the sarin gas attacks in the Tokyo subway, perpetrated by Aum Shinrikyo. By the way, those guys, the Aum Shinrikyo, had a lot of big brains among its ranks, many top-class scientists, physicians, and other professionals. What a coincidence, isn't it?
A UFO and Mysterious Vehicles, July 1974, Jerez de la Frontera, Andalusia, Spain. This case happened to a civil guard, one of the national police forces in Spain, and because of that the name of the person will remain anonymous. The witness was in a field close to National Highway IV, near San Juan de Dios neighborhood, hanging out with his girlfriend. At about 11:30 p.m. both of them saw a round-shaped orange light, similar to a streetlight passing behind a block of buildings. Over them, the witness said at an elevation of about 300 meters, 1 feet, across the highway, following the direction of the ladder towards the town of Trebujina, and appearing to land on a hill 3 kilometers, 1.8 miles, away from the couple. The witness took his girlfriend to her house, and later took his bike, a minicross Puch, and went towards the hill. When I entered the road that goes to Trebujina, I realized that the light was gone. But even then I decided to go there. Once I was at the bottom of the hill, I noticed that there was another bike parked on the roadside. At that moment the witness saw 2 boys running down the hill. Both were very scared and told me that they just saw a round-shaped object, with a dome and 2 shadows inside it. I asked them to come with me, but they absolutely refused. Afterwards they took their bike and left for Jerez. I told myself, now that I've come here I will at least take a look. When I was almost at the top of the hill I saw the light again, moving 200 or 300 meters, 650 to 1 feet. Above the ground. It looked like it was following the road, and moments later it landed on another hill, 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles away from my current position. I quickly descended down the hill and entered another road, going towards the light, without losing sight of it. But when I was close to it, it just faded away. That is when I noticed the absolute silence, and that I hadn't seen any vehicle all night. Everything around me felt haunted. Not very far from where I was, I saw that the road had a hump, and I thought that I would be able to see something from there. Before reaching the hump, a blue truck appeared, going towards Jerez. It passed next to me without making any kind of sound. I turned my bike around and started following it at a 50 meters, 165 feet distance. The road was curvy, and 2 minutes later the truck took a left turn and disappeared. This was materially impossible, because after that turn the road goes straight for 800 meters, half a mile. After that I began to feel very nervous and decided to return to Jerez. I turned on the high beams and the object suddenly appeared. It was on the middle of the road. It seemed that the object was already on the road, and when I turned on the high beams it lit up, illuminating the road in an orange glow. Thanks to that I was able to see a little dome in the object. At that moment my nervousness turned into fear. After some seconds I started doing light signals with the headlight of my bike, but that thing didn't respond. Then I inclined myself backwards and touched the exhaust pipe. I obviously burned my hand, but that was the fastest way to verify that I wasn't having a hallucination. I sped up towards the light, and in the blink of an eye the object completely faded away. A second later the headlights of 2 cars appeared just where the object was. I stood there, completely incredulous. I approached the vehicles and stopped near the driver's window. They looked like a Mercedes or a Dodge. When the witness was asked why he stopped, he answered that he didn't know why. That something inside him said these cars are not normal. Inside the car, on the driver's seat, I saw a man in his 50s, silver hair, wearing a gray suit, with a white shirt and a dark tie. He greeted me with a good evening, and I greeted him back. Then he asked, "Excuse me, the National Highway 4, where is it?" I pointed to Jerez and answered, "Do you see that road and that bridge? The highway is there." On the front passenger seat I saw another man, and a third man and a woman on the back seats. I couldn't see the second and third men, because the interior light wasn't turned on. But I saw the woman thanks to the headlight of my bike. She was blonde, long hair, maybe 35 years old, and wearing a dress. Their faces were weird. They didn't have Spanish features, but they also didn't look like foreigners. The man that was speaking with me had no accent. I explained to him how to reach the highway, but after some seconds I just asked, "Do you want me to go with you?" And he said very well, so I led them, and I noticed that the cars moved in complete silence. When asked if he saw who was inside the second car, the witness answered that he saw someone inside, but because of the darkness he couldn't see well. We passed under the bridge and entered Jerez. I stopped and they did the same. I went to the driver's window again. "Now continue forward, and turn right at the first street," I said. He answered very well, "Thank you," but I felt uneasy. Even from there it can be difficult to reach the highway. So I asked, "Do you want me to go with you into the highway?" "No, thank you," I insisted again. "I don't really mind." And the driver answered with a stronger tone, "No, thank you." So I said goodbye. I saw them turn into the street that I mentioned, and that was the end. When the witness was asked if he had felt something when he approached the driver's window for the first time, he responded without delay, "Yes, I had one feeling, that they were waiting for me."
The Puente de Vallecas case. In 1991, Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro, a schoolgirl, and a number of her friends were discovered playing with a Ouija board during the lunch hour at the school. Friends of Estefania told that she had always been interested in the occult and mysterious. The teacher, being from a relatively Catholic and conservative area, who discovered them, proceeded to kick the board, breaking the glass of the planchette and preventing the girls from properly ending the session. Friends of the girl claimed that a black smoke had risen from the planchette, which Estefania supposedly breathed in due to being closest to the artifact. A few days later, the girl became unusually despondent and irritable. She also began having convulsions, which were ruled to be epileptical in nature. On August 14, 1991, she died at home, after having entered a catatonic state following a violent convulsive fit. The official cause of death was ruled as cardiac arrest by presiding doctors. Soon after her death, the Gutierrez Lazaro claimed that violent poltergeist-like phenomena began to manifest in their apartment. They reported a disembodied voice crying "Mom, Mom," a number of times, seemingly originating from the room of the deceased girl. They also reported hearing laughter and shrieks. The family reported other standard poltergeist activity: doors closing and opening violently, violent knocks against the walls, furniture being shaken forcefully. The 2 younger siblings also described seeing the apparition of a man dragging himself across the floor of the apartment. Eventually, the police were called in, after the report was made that a photo of the girl, taken a few months before her death, and as such, secured tightly in a glass photo frame, had spontaneously combusted, consuming the face of the deceased girl. The police report compiled by the 4 police members sent to the residence mentioned several strange and unexplainable phenomena, such as a large crimson stain that formed before their eyes on the kitchen table, which analysis showed to be saliva, a Christ figure from a crucifix being wrenched apart and violently flung across a room, a poster being shredded as if by invisible claws. However, the police were unable to do anything in particular, and the family changed residences soon after. The strange occurrences ceased to manifest after the family moved.
The ghost face of University of Texas Medical Branch Galveston. The likeness of a human face, specifically, the likeness of a William A. Bigfoot Wallace that first appeared on the outer fourth-story wall of Building 71 Ewing Hall of the University of Texas Medical Branch campus in the 1980s, shortly after the construction of the building. After the appearance of the face, the university had it sandblasted. However, soon after, the face had appeared once more, this time on the third floor. The image was sandblasted again, only for it to reappear on the second floor, after which the university ceased its efforts to remove it. The face is purported to have manifested as a result of a land dispute, in which said Bigfoot Wallace was entitled to a grant of land which the state of Texas refused to yield, with the face only appearing once the state of Texas erected a building on the parcel of land claimed by the then dead claimant.
The abandoned lifeboat of Bouvet Island. In 1964, Lieutenant Commander Alan Crawford of the UK and his crew landed on Bouvet Island, the most remote island in the world, to investigate a relatively new about 10 years piece of land that had risen due to volcanic ability, and to test its ability to host a weather tower. Upon reaching the island by helicopter, travel by ship is nearly impossible, as the sides of the island are ice cliffs. They were met by the sight of an empty lifeboat floating in the landlocked lagoon within this new piece of land. The oars of the lifeboat were on shore, neatly laid out together next to some rope and a copper tank. No bodies or other signs of human presence were found. The lifeboat was unmarked. The crew of Lieutenant Commander Alan Crawford took a photo of the object and proceeded to carry out their task. A few years later, a Norwegian Arctic expedition proceeded to land on the island again to construct a weather station. However, they were unable to find any trace of the lifeboat, the oars, or the copper tank. Perhaps not really paranormal, but certainly mysterious, considering the remoteness of the island.
Room 428, Wilson Hall, a dormitory hall in the Ohio University campus in Athens built in 1965 that is claimed to be the site of strange occurrences, particularly the room numbered 428. Popular rumors tell that a student committed self-end in said room in the 1970s. Other rumors tell of a student who dabbled in the occult and became unhinged. Regardless of the truth of these rumors, Room 428 is currently closed and unavailable to students. The room was given its current status by the university administration after a number of student tenants reported standard poltergeist activity, the appearance of shadowy entities, disembodied voices and footsteps, spirit rappings, and, most unsettling and notable of all, the appearance of an eerie demon face on the inside of the room's main door, which kept reappearing despite the administration removing and replacing the door a number of times before it simply declared the room uninhabitable. It seems to this day, the university administration still considers room 428 uninhabitable.
The Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca head, a terracotta artifact discovered in 1933 in a tomb located in the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca archaeological zone, some 60 kilometers south of Mexico City, due to its dissimilarity to Mesoamerican art motifs and its stylistic closeness to Greco-Roman art. The small head has been held as evidence of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. An assessment of the case was made in 2001 by a joint American and Mexican effort claiming. This result clears up the doubts of colonial manufacture of the artifact and makes the hypothesis of Roman origin applicable. The identification of the head as Roman work from the 2 to 3 century AD has been further confirmed by Bernard Andry. According to Andry, the head is without any doubt Roman, and the lab analysis has confirmed that it is ancient. The stylistic examination tells us more precisely that it is a Roman work from around the 2 century AD, and the hairstyle and the shape of the beard present the typical traits of the Severian emperors period 193 to 235 AD, exactly in the fashion of the epoch. A thermoluminescence test performed in 1995 by a German institute established its age range to somewhere between the 9th century BC and the middle of the 13th century AD, confirming a pre-colonial origin. However, Payon, the supervisor of the original dig and the discoverer of the artifact, did not publish information about the head itself until 1960, some 27 years after its supposed finding. Interesting OOP art. The head is believed to be of authentic Roman origin, though researchers are cautious, saying that the face was most likely carried aboard a wrecked ship carried by sea currents from Roman outposts on Lanzarote and Tenerife in the Atlantic to the Americas. Other hypotheses as to how it ended up in a grave of a Mesoamerican noble are that 1. Evidence of a European visit to the region. 2. That the figure was originally traded, carried to Asia, and from there it reached the Americas via a trans-Pacific trade route. But there is also the problem that the existence of the head was only reported so many years after it was supposedly found.
Cash-Landrum Incident 1980, one of the very few UFO cases to result in civil court proceeding. On the evening of December 29th, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Colby Landrum were driving home to Dayton, Texas after dining out at about 9 p.m. While driving on an isolated road in dense woods, the witnesses said they observed a light above some trees, but thinking it was an airplane approaching Houston Intercontinental Airport about 35 miles away, they gave it little notice. A few minutes later on the winding road, the witnesses saw what they believed to be the same light as before, but much closer and very bright. The light, they claimed, came from a huge diamond-shaped object, which hovered at about treetop level. The object's base was expelling flame and emitting significant heat. Cash stopped the car, though Vicki Landrum, a born-again Christian, believed she was witnessing the second coming of Christ, telling her grandson that Jesus would not hurt them. The two women went outside to investigate the object, but got back in the car due to the Landrum's grandson becoming frantic. The witnesses said the heat was strong enough to make the car's metal body painful to the touch. Cash said she had to use her coat to protect her hand from being burnt when she finally re-entered the car. When she touched the car's dashboard, Landrum's hand pressed into the softened vinyl, leaving an imprint that was evident weeks later. Investigators later cited this handprint as proof of the witness's account. At some point, the object rose up into the sky, and the witnesses claim black helicopters approached and surrounded it. After the UFO and helicopters left, Cash took the Landrums home, then retired for the evening. That night, they all experienced similar symptoms, though Cash to a greater degree. All suffered from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, generalized weakness, a burning sensation in their eyes, and feeling as though they'd suffered sunburns. However, Cash eventually had to be hospitalized after her condition deteriorated such that patches of her hair and skin started to fall away. The Landrums also sought medical attention, though their conditions were less severe. A radiologist who examined the witnesses' medical records for Mutual UFO Network wrote, "We have strong evidence that these patients have suffered secondary damage to ionizing radiation. It is also possible that there was an infrared or ultraviolet component as well. However, contend that, although the symptoms were similar to those caused by ionizing radiation, the rapidity of onset was only consistent with a massive dose that would have meant certain death in a few days, since all of the victims lived for years after the incident. Some suggest the cause of the symptoms was some kind of chemical contamination, presumably by an aerosol." Vicki Landrum telephoned a number of U.S. government agencies and officials about the encounter, and eventually, Mutual UFO Network began research on the case. Due to the helicopter's presence identified as Chinooks, the witnesses presumed that at least one branch of the United States Armed Forces had witnessed the object. In 1982, Lieutenant Colonel George Sarin of the Department of the Army Inspector General began the only thorough formal governmental investigation into the supposed UFO encounter, but could find no evidence that the helicopters the witnesses claimed to have seen belonged to the U.S. Armed Forces. Eventually, Cash and Landrum contacted their U.S. senators, who suggested that the witnesses file a complaint with the Judge Advocate Claims Office at Bergstrom Air Force Base, with an attorney taking on the case pro bono. The case wound its way through the U.S. courts for several years. Cash and Landrum sued the U.S. government for $20 million. On August 21, 1986, a U.S. district court judge dismissed their case.
The Ummo Affair, a series of decade-long claims that beings from the planet Ummo were communicating with people on Earth. The phenomenon first began in 1966, when a number of UFO 14 enthusiasts, supposed contactees and clairvoyants, occultists, poets, and writers in France and Spain began receiving mysterious correspondence from anonymous sources. These were usually very detailed letters documenting facets of Ummite society, culture, history, and technology. Within the year, various persons, mostly in Madrid, but some in Paris, received about 150 Ummite documents, totaling over 1,000 pages. In some 2 years, the affair had reached mainstream news outlets in Europe, and every page of these documents was stamped with the same symbol of 3 linked lines, similar to the alchemical symbol for Uranus. New Ummite documents would continue surfacing for many subsequent years. Many others have received Ummo letters, including French scientist Jean-Pierre Petit, a researcher at the French National Center for Scientific Research. The true identity of the author of said pieces of correspondence remains unknown. To this day, it is widely assumed that the Ummo affair was an elaborate hoax. It is rumored that the entire thing was orchestrated by the CIA or the KGB, though the reasons why remain unknown. And other theories point to the New Left movement, which would erupt in 1968 regardless. To the present day, a small number of devotees still claim to regularly receive correspondence from these Ummites, including a Bolivian cult known as the Daughters of Ummo.
The Bennington Triangle phrase was coined in 1992 by Joseph Citro in reference to a number of strange disappearances in Vermont between 1920 to 1950. The most well-known being the disappearances of Mitty Rivers, Paula Weldon, James Tedford, Paul Jepson, Frietta Langer, and lesser-known others ingrained into the folklore of the area. The most mysterious of the aforementioned was that of James Tedford, who disappeared despite being in a bus full of people. Tedford, a veteran of World War II, was on his way home to Bennington from a trip to St. Albans, Vermont. There were 14 other passengers in the bus, not including the driver. They all testified to seeing him there, sleeping in his seat. However, upon reaching its destination, Tedford had vanished. His luggage was found in the rack above his seat, and plainly on his seat, his bus timetable. Tedford was never seen or heard from again. Oddly enough, from reading around, it seems the wife of this James Tedford had also disappeared earlier before, upon his return from the front lines in World War II. His wife was nowhere to be found, and the property they had been renting was found to be abandoned. The last sighting of her by other townspeople of the area was her walking to an Emoco store. Concerning the other disappearances, here's the Wikipedia link. Most of them seem odd, but certainly not as odd as that of James Tedford. For the rest of them disappeared as they were walking around in a trail or being in places where they could have wandered off without being noticed, if they wanted to, whereas Tedford was in a moving vehicle surrounded by other people.
Electrical people. There have been cases of people causing electrical phenomena from their bodies. One of them was Angelique Lecoton, from La Perrière, France, in 1846. When she was 14, a strange condition manifested in her body. Whenever she touched an object not made of iron, this would fly away, as rejected by an invisible force around her body. On the contrary, when the object was made or contained iron, it would become attached to her. She was also capable of sending furniture across the room. Distressed and frightened, her family resorted to and exhausted every physician in town. Rumors began to spread about the girl's strange condition. One of the people hearing about Lecoton was the celebrated scientist François Arago, who arrived at La Perrière with a group of colleagues from the Académie des Sciences. In order to study Angelique, Arago noted that her condition was akin to electromagnetism, that the phenomenon peaked at evening, and the force was stronger on her left side, especially the left wrist and elbow. Angelique would suffer seizures while along with her electromagnetic powers. Her heartbeat would increase to 128, and she would flee the room in panic. After 10 weeks of attacks, the electric phenomena completely ceased, and Angelique resumed her normal life, feeling relieved. Frank McKinstry of Joplin, Missouri, was subject to several tests in 1889 after he reported to feel a charge running through his body. Once he would get charged, he needed to start moving. If not, he would find himself glued to the ground, and only with the help of others he could lift his feet. Joseph Louis Hamburger was subject of study the Maryland College of Pharmacy in 1890. When he was discovered to be a human magnet, a metallic object would stick to his chest and arms, even dangle from his fingertips. He could hold a glass full of iron filings weighing up to 5 pounds. Between 1883 to 1885, Lulu Hurst made a career out of her electromagnetic powers. Called the Wonder of Georgia, he toured the Union giving demonstrations in fairs, carnivals, and also private homes. It all began like many poltergeist cases, with china mysteriously being smashed after flying off the shelves, strange noises at night, doors and windows being opened, furniture changing place, voices coming from nowhere shouting yes or no. The day after the noises started, Lulu handed a relative to a chair. As the chair twisted in Lulu's grasp, 4 men tried to hold it, but the forces were too great. The chair broke into pieces and they were flung violently backwards. Lulu, like Angelique, ran screaming from the house. In her act, she would play variations of a little girl defeating several grown-up men. She would hold a billiard cue from one. 2 men at the other end would try to wrestle her from it. She could also lift 3 men sitting on each other's laps on the same chair, merely resting her open palms on its back. She would then lightly touch the chair while 5 men tried in vain to budge it from the spot. Her career came to an abrupt end in 1885. When she became 17 years old, her powers disappeared. She married her stage manager.
Phantom armies. Since ancient times, there have been claims and sights of entire armies in the sky, aiding armies against their mundane foes, from the Vikings, who saw in the clamor and smoke of the battle hosts of soldiers, to the Breton peasants who would fight with the assistance of King Arthur from above. St. Augustine, in his magnum opus The City of God, wrote that during the days of the Civil War, Roman soldiers told there was a battle in the plain fields of Campania between mysterious beings, called by them larvae, ghosts. After the battle, footprints of sandals and carriages were left in the soil. According to the witnesses, days later, flesh and blood soldiers fought each other in that exact same field. According to Berman's Thesaurus of the History of Italy, the city of Otranto was saved of Suleiman the Magnificent and his tremendous armies by the apparition of 800 martyrs at the top of the walls and battlements of the city. According to the previous records of the Bishop of Otranto, 800 people were killed by maimed too when tried to conquer the city. In 1480, decades before Suleiman, their corpses were not buried, and their flesh didn't decay, remaining as if they were still alive. Fairies also were seen forming spectral armies. W.G. Wood, in Traces of the Elder Faiths in Ireland, narrates an instance of a fairy army in 1797, marching according to witnesses across the bog between Maryborough and Stradbally. It was midday, in the hills Balafriar. In 1836, a phantom battle among fairies was seen by the people of the area. It even left marks on the ground and trees around the hill. 2 fairy armies were also reported fighting in a Kilkenny ditch. Afterwards, people found the bushes torn, trees crushed, and blood on the grass. In the year 1642, a pamphlet appeared in London with the following title: A Sign from Heaven, or a fearful and terrible noise heard in the air at Aldborough in the county of Suffolk. On Thursday, the 4th day of August, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, wherein was heard the beating of drums, the discharging of muskets and great ordnance for the space of an hour or more. The pamphlet also gave the name of 24 respected citizens, who were witnesses of the event, and even testified under oath before the Parliament. A stone of great weight was also shown to the lords, which fell from the sky during the battle. During the witch hunts of the 16th century, it was common to see hosts of witches across the sky, scaring villagers and city folks alike. In the summer of 1686, people in the Highlands were afraid of an army of the air, which was causing an uproar on the towns it visited, extending over Scotland like a dire cloud. One account tells of showers of bonnets, hats, guns and swords, which covered the trees and the ground, companies of men in arms marching in order upon the water side.
The Bommeleeer Affair. In May 30th of 1984, several pylons belonging to the Luxembourgian electrical company Segedal were blown up. The police determined the explosives used were those used in quarries. Coincidentally, several quarries across Luxembourg reported their explosives and detonators stolen. Days later, Segedal received a note demanding a sum of money in exchange of stopping with the bombings. At first, the company refused, but after consulting with the police, they accepted. Another note was sent. The bombers knew it was a trick. The money would be traced by the law, so they declined picking up the money. In the next weeks, the bombers diversified their targets, bombing the gendarmerie headquarters, the Palace of Justice, public monuments. The most daring attack was perpetrated on the meeting of the European Council at Kirchberg. A small pipe bomb was thrown from a moving car. The bomb exploded, causing minor damages. During the frenetic car chase, a soldier was killed when his car turned upside down. The last attack could have been the worst. A complex bombing device was discovered thanks to an anonymous informant in some woods near the Luxembourg airport. The mechanism, if triggered, could have caused several deaths. In total, there were 20 bombings from May 30th, 1984 to the 25th of March, 1986. The bombers were never captured. Their true motives remained unknown. The people of the duchy began to make wild speculations, accusing the NATO of Gladio-type operations. Some even accused Prince Jean, then heir to the throne of the Great Duke, of being involved, even being the bomber itself. The fires of conspiracy were fanned even more when briefly after the attacks ended, He renounced to his rights to the throne. Other suspects are the elite members of the Luxembourgian police forces.
The boring life, strange death, and unexpected apotheoses of Robert Pakington, Mercer. After years as a humble apprentice in the Mercer's company, by 1510, Pakington was one of London's most prosperous mercers, importing and exporting the finest cloths and wares, gaining a distinguished clientele, among whom were the trendsetter nobles of the era, like Lady Pomington, the Marquis of Sutterton, and the Duke of Berry. From 1520 to 1529 he was elected, among others, as a representative to the Parliament on behalf of the Mercers' Guild, presenting articles to the government. One of these articles caused a bit of a turmoil because of its anti-clerical nature. But the polemic was short-lived. In 1533 he was elected to the Parliament, and re-elected in 1536. There, he won some fame for his anti-clerical sentiments, speaking somewhat against the covetousness and cruelty of the clergy. According to fellow parliamentary Edward Hall, during his final years, he was somewhat of a Thomas Cromwell agent, especially on Flanders matters, of which he had first-hand knowledge thanks to his commercial ties to that country. He didn't report directly to Cromwell, using fellow businessman Stephen Vaughan, whose sympathy for the Protestant cause was notable. The bitter end came on the morning of the 13th of November of 1536, when Pakington was going from his home in Cheapside to the Mercer's Chapel, just on the opposite side. It was a short walk, but Pakington was too slow. Someone appeared and shot him with a handgun. And one morning amongst all other, being a great misty morning such as hath seldom been seen, even as he was crossing the street from his house to the church, he was suddenly murdered with a gun, which of the neighbors was plainly heard and by a great number of laborers there standing at Soper's Lane Inn. But the deed-doer was never espied nor known. Pakington has the dubious honor and record of being the first person murdered in London with a gun. The murder shocked the city, and the authorities did everything they could to find the culprits, even after posting a succulent reward in gold. Not a single clue or snitch came out. In his will, he left a substantial sum to some Lutheran preachers, around £300, a small fortune in that age. After his death, with the religious storm broken on England, the Protestant considered him a martyr. Reformer John Bale accused 3 Catholic bishops of the conspiracy to murder Pakington. John Fox, renegade Catholic bishop, supported the theory and gave names, though many doubted his claims. A series of theories appeared among the public, blaming the murders on almost every already deceased bishop. A string of convenient confessions of already hung criminals appeared, all of them admitting being them the ones who pulled the trigger and killed Pakington. The question is now who did not slay Pakington, wrote the chronicler Raphael Holinshed.
The Inaccurate Ghost, Chicago, 1933. A group of people were returning from the A Century of Progress exhibition. Near Lakeshore Drive, the group finds a girl standing on the roadside with a suitcase. The girl hailed them. The people decided to stop and give her a hitch. She hops on, despite being among them. They couldn't see her well. They started talking. It was nice to chat about the city and the fair, but suddenly, things would turn strange when she told them that the fair is going to slide off into Lake Michigan in September. Then she gave an address and a phone number to contact her whenever they want. When the passengers turned around to ask her about her prediction, they discovered she had disappeared, completely vanished. Curious about the whole deal, some of the boys went to the address she gave. They arrived at a nice family home in the Chicago suburbs, where a middle-aged man was sitting on the porch. The boys told them the story, and the man nodded approvingly, as if he was hearing the story once more. He said to them,
"Yes, that was my wife. She died 4 years ago."
The story ends on a weird note for this kind of tale. Despite the celebrated powers of prophecy of ghosts, the fair never slipped off to the lake.
Ya-te-veo, man-eating tree, according to J.W. Buell's Land and Sea. 1897, in the deep jungles of Central America, where there's still a lot of unexplored land to these days, exists a strange vegetation which nourishes itself from the blood sucked from animals, big and small alike, even from humans when the opportunity arises. The explorer gave us a thoroughly description of its appearance and habits: a short trunk, similar to a stump, surrounded by long spines. The edges are armed with dagger-like teeth, instead of growing upright or inclines along the trunk. The vicious branches lay on the ground when an unsuspected victim arrives, thinking the trunk is a stump from a dead tree. He sits on it, or simply walks by unaware of the deadly spines. These spring to life, first grabbing his feet, then the rest of the body, penetrating the skin with the barbed wire-like teeth, sucking the blood. The branches crush the body, squeezing till the last drop of blood. Once this occurs, the Ya-te-veo throws the empty carcass, and awaits for a new victim. Several man-eating trees have been reported around the world, from Sierra Madre, Mexico, to Madagascar.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.